I am correct, Robin. At this point, you would like to move to a discussion of best practices.
Yes, thank you. We have a little bonus session for everyone. And Antonio and I, when we were planning the conference, then Michael, when he came in, we thought, okay, well, we're going to have everyone, the idea we briefly asked for Stuart and Des was to provoke the audience. And we thought, now you're all going to be buzzing and thinking about where can I have my breakthrough ideas. So Antonio and I have done some of the homework for you. It's been, Tony, what, 6 years, no, 5 years, 6 years since we started designing the strategy implementation professional course. And we spent 2.5 years developing it, recording, laying the material, deciding what content should go in, putting the model together that you can see on the screen, designing our 4 stages around crafting, embedding, executing, sustaining for each of the 7 modules. And the funny side of that was we launched in January 2020, which of course was the cusp of the pandemic, and everybody started, going. It was obviously then in lockdown, and overnight people were saying, "My course is now online." Antonio and I were looking at each other, going, "It took us 2.5 years to build the course," and of course the difference is the amount of what you put on the content. So we worked for that, and then we thought, okay, that's been now 3 years. So what we'd like to do now is a 30-minute session, which is going to be about 10-15 minutes of Antonio and I sharing, and then we're going to ask you to vote and discuss. And we're going to share with you, because the conference is about hands-on tools and tips, we want to provide hands-on tools and tips for great implementation in 2023. So we're going to take you around the 7 areas. We'll do a literally 1-line introduction of each module, and then we've put together the tips and the tools. So here we go. The first one is leadership excellence. And you just heard Stuart and Des talking about how the importance of leadership and how critical it is. And from Roger Martin, that it's not just about crafting the strategy, but being engaged in the implementation. So the first one I would like to share before I hand over to Antonio is when we look at leadership today in 2023, there's a global shift happening from vertical to horizontal leadership. Now, these are maybe some terms that some of you have not heard. Vertical leadership, you're familiar with. I promise you are. Why? Because it's what we do every day. We go to a meeting. We form a subcommittee of the main committee. We have to get approvals and signatures, and we keep having to go upstream for budgets and getting things signed off. And we're going upwards, which is why we call it vertical management. The shift is to horizontal leadership. And horizontal leadership is an article that Michael and I published together for Duke University in their program Dialogue. And we define it as the movement to when leaders now recognize that organizations are working horizontally, and they have to support agility, create what we've talked about earlier. Psychology is creating a environment which is safe. It's about using the data and empowering employees. And I'll give you one very practical example. And this was in the article Michael and I published together. Leaders demonstrate horizontal leadership when they go from being the first to speak in a meeting to the last. Normally, they set the tone, everybody agrees what they say, and it's very formalized. But when you're moving to agile and horizontal organizations, The leaders need to listen much more to understand what's going on, how the data is being used, what's being designed in the design thinking, what was created in the hackathon. And they go from being the first to the last person to speak. So I've given a little bit more of an introduction to kick it off. Antonio, do you want to take the second one?
Sustain an employee is exciting. So this is something that maybe in the past you would think that it's the role of HR and they need to take care of the people side. I think one of the priorities today for leaders and CEOs and implementation experts is making sure that people feel great at work. We heard how many times we heard today psychological safety. This is not the role of HR. This is the role of the leaders. So I think if you want a company to succeed, an organization, private, public, the people need to feel happy to go to work. They need to be proud to go to work. And this has been, for me, something that I changed my mind. I thought HR is, of course, the person in charge of doing all these soft things. And today I recognize that, no, this is the leader. And if there's one of the top priorities of a leader is making sure that the people feel great at work. And if you're doing transformation, that people feel great in your transformation program. This is a top priority. It's not the last one. It's not somebody else's problem. It's the leader's priority. So I think just stating the evidence, but just wanted to highlight that this is something that I see coming up and as a big priority and for leadership excellence.
And very much follows on from what Liran was saying about looking after your employees contributes to making a great place.
Exactly.
Okay. Now, for those of you who've been in the Institute since we started 3 years ago, you'll have noticed last year that we changed from this module, which used to be focused called financial, to value creation. And this was to recognize the global shift that a company is no longer in business to provide for the shareholder, but is responsible to stakeholders. So you have responsibility for sustainability, your community, the environment, as well as your employees, the customer, your suppliers. So it's your key stakeholders. And for me, the best practice for 2023 I'll share is there's a shift going on that we're moving away from annual budgeting to quarterly. And the driver for this is for agile. Companies are struggling to adopt agile when you have an annual budgeting because they can't create the resources fast enough to support the Scrum initiatives, the new ideas that are coming through. So quarterly budgeting is then allowing you to support the rapid innovation and growth that we now work at an accelerated rate.
Right. And the second point, it's not something completely new, but I can see that this is becoming an urgency. When you look at the amount of projects that companies are launching, and for several reasons, for the speed of change in the world, for this shorter life cycles of strategies and products, for the increased competition. So companies today, they have exceed too much projects going on. They launch more projects than they complete as well. This is something that I'm working with large companies, is how can we control that? How can we can focus more, and focus prioritization is a very difficult skill. And knowing what the HBR editor, chief editor, told me when I published with them, he said, your projects are your future. This is how you create value. And I told Adi, I said, you cannot imagine how poorly companies manage their future. And one basic rule, this is something that we share, Robin and I, when I do workshops, is less is more. It's easier to implement 3 strategic initiatives than 12, than 8. So try to focus. It's hard to choose the 3 ones, but once you choose them, just go full on. And the rule that I always said, never launch a new initiative if you don't stop, finish, cancel, 2 or 3 that will help you to reduce and to focus.
And just a reminder, we're going to show you all of them at the end, and we're going to ask you to vote. So we'll highlight the next few. Under the business model. So the business model in the strategy implementation professional course is understanding how the organizational structure supports the new strategy. Why? Because you change your strategy, you change the way you work. That's what new strategy means. It means working differently. And in 2023, a new term that's emerged out of digital is to identify the impact of ecosystems within your business. Now, I'm a bit embarrassed because we have Joshua and some of the team from Hire, and the Hire group were doing this 10 years ago. And a Hire group, have become the largest and most successful, and they're actually nominated tomorrow when we'll be announcing the company awards, because they've done a phenomenal job at eliminating the middle management, building micro enterprises. And to give you an example from Hire, they created, for example, they don't sell products, they sell a platform. So in Europe, they sell a wine cooler. And the wine cooler, you don't just buy the product, but it connects you with other people who like similar wine. It follows what wines you buy and it makes recommendations. It gives you opportunity to visit vineyards of your favorite wines. It gives you interesting new releases and information. So they build a community and a platform and create an ecosystem. So that's a very simple introduction, but ecosystems are very much the new frontier for doing business.
So I think this is a big topic. Now we hear every day about artificial intelligence and big data more than ever. And I think one of the biggest challenges when you want to work into this space of AI is data. And most of you recognize that data is not a high priority in most organizations. It's just spread all over the place. It's not up to date, it's not consistent. And if you want to be competitive, if you want to use artificial intelligence and all these latest technologies, you need to put data first. You need to have a strategy for understanding your data, modeling your data, and having somebody owning the data as well. So this is what we call data-driven organization. So instead of ignoring data, we need to embrace it. We need to understand it. There's so much into it. You know, the big companies like Google or Facebook, or they've been pioneers in how data you can extract information to drive strategy. So I think companies should embrace that too. And it should be a priority when you're looking at your strategy and how you're adapting your business model to be competitive in this digital and changing world.
All right, so 4 of 7, and we'll pick up the pace a little bit. Culture, we all familiar with. We all know the expression culture eats strategy for breakfast. So 2 quick tips on the culture evolution. In this area, we focus on helping you understand that your culture drives the way a company implements. 2 companies can have the same strategy, but how they implement it is driven by the culture. And evolving culture means making people understand each other better to work together. We're finally breaking down silos. Digital has broken through that barrier, because you cannot become a digitally driven company if you're siloed, because you end up competing rather than collaborating in a hackathon, a design thinking, a journey map. So in culture, we're finally bringing people together and understanding and collaborating and working together more than ever before.
And very much connected to that one is that in the past, a strategy will last 7 years. That was the average of a strategy. Knowing that strategies now last 2-3 years max, that means that the culture has to adapt, culture has to support, right? You need to create the right behaviors to make sure that the implementation becomes a priority, that people focus on execution. And this is driven as well with the culture. So this starts with the leadership. They need to recognize the role they play on the culture, but also make sure that people understand that we need to change it quickly. Somebody talked today about the change fatigue, right? I think Liran. And there's nothing that you can do. We need to train and we need to be comfortable with change. If you stop changing, the business will not last very long. So it's really a very important aspect that culture has to be addressed, has to be supporting the implementation, even more critical than before.
In our stakeholder management, we focus very much on the module about how people are collaborating. And the key new message in 2023 is we got to create a platform for conversations to engage and communicate the strategy. So now we've got to leverage the technology. In all our research, Antonio and I have done over 20 years, even before we started the Institute, every single research, one of the top 3 reasons why strategy implementation fails, poor communication. People don't know, only 5% of employees know what the strategy is. So we got to create new platforms and leverage new technologies to engage and communicate the strategy.
And then I think something that I cover in my HBR book is the way we look at objectives and targets and goals. We tend to do that still very much top down. We still use the hierarchical approaches. It's decided at the top and then it's cascaded. If we go to a more transversal, horizontal type of leadership, that means also that we need to involve different part of the organization on the definition of the goals. It cannot be top down anymore. It has to be done together. Key stakeholders. I use that now a lot in benefits for projects. Ask your stakeholders what to expect. What can they do better? So when you involve stakeholders in decision making, in goal setting, the buying is automatically. When you impose people things, that doesn't work. People will get frustrated, resistant. So this is a game changer. Involve your stakeholders when you're setting targets, looking at benefits.
So the penultimate, we kicked off with Liran from Google sharing the importance of employee well-being. And we used the term employee engagement. We didn't predict 6-7 years ago how much more critical employee engagement was going to become in a digital world, because leaders set the digital ambition, but the implementation is bottom up. Why? Because it's the employees who do the customer journey mapping, who come up with the new ideas, who know what the customer frustrations and problems are. So for this one, we want to ask early adopters, and Lorianne used this as well to find champions, but we want people to volunteer. When somebody chooses to do something, they are 5 times more likely to take the action. So these are your employees who see the implementation as an opportunity. They're like, thankfully, we're getting on. And this is one of the strongest, most consistent best practices that's become even more critical in 2023.
And linked to that, I think it's the other, we forget often to talk about the why. You say we're going to do a digital transformation, but why? Why are we doing that? What's the goal, right? So we are not used to talk about the why. And if we want to increase engagement of employees, let's talk about the why. Let's talk about the purpose. I introduced the concept of the project purpose because that's what drives engagement, not a business case, not targets. It's the why which drives engagement. And we're not used to talk about the why. We talk about the what. So this is really another of these easy to implement tools which has big impact.
And in the 7th and final module on the strategy implementation, where we focused on our roadmap was tracking performance. Because, we buried our head when we did our research that leaders were only once or twice a year checking on the implementation for the future of their business. So the first tip for 2023 is the world is moving much faster. The strategic landscape is changing underneath your feet much quicker. So we need to start monthly meetings, making sure implementation is the first thing on the agenda, not the last. Where we go, oh, we have 3-4 minutes left. What about our implementation? No, if this is the future of your organization, it has to be first. And that reflects and demonstrates its importance throughout the whole organization.
And related to that as well is, now we talk about shorter life cycles for strategy, the same for measures. We need to incorporate new measures as we change our strategy. The KPI should not be the same. Your balance scorecard, whatever you use, OKRs, we need to adapt them. We need to see evolution. If you're working on digital transformation, great examples, great book from Robin. There's a lot of new KPIs. This is what successful companies do. So we change our strategy, we change the measures. Very, very important as well. Concept.
All right, so we've shared with you 14, and we realize that's a lot to grasp in just a short time.